Hello, my name is Yann. I am a physicist and have been working a long time in academia and will soon be joining a FANG company. My talk today is focused on ChatGPT, and the question is ChatGPT just lossy compression, or should we rather see ChatGPT as a form of creative expansion? That talk is based on the paper I published on Medium some time ago that received quite a big audience, and I would like to describe that paper for a general audience and give you an understanding of the goal of that paper. I wrote that paper because I saw an article published by an author called Ted Chiang, and that paper was published in the New Yorker, and Ted Chiang in that article claimed that ChatGPT was in fact only a lossy compression algorithm. So I will argue that this description of ChatGPT as being only a form of lossy compression is itself complete BS. And the reason why I think it is BS is that the mathematics of the compression algorithms, such as JPEG, that Ted Chiang cites in his paper, is completely different from what ChatGPT does. Now, in that article, Ted Chiang starts with a very interesting story about a mathematician called David Kriesel, who had to investigate a problem that was shown to him with a machine called a Xerox machine, which of course should make a perfect copy of what you put into the machine. And in fact, the people noticed that when they put some architect plans in the Xerox machine, then the output of the Xerox was not the plan with the figures like the square meters or the square feet, but was in fact the correct figure, the correct rooms, but the figures had been changed. So what David Kriesel understood when he investigated that problem, I will try to show you there, is that the algorithm used, the compression algorithm used, said that the number 7 was the same as the number 9, which means, for example, that if you had a room with 17 square feet or 17 square meters or whatever, then on the Xerox paper, you would not see 17, but you would see 19. So Ted Chiang argues that this is a key component of ChatGPT. It's that it produces an output that is believable, but that is in fact BS. So going back to that mathematician called David Kriesel, he understood that the compression algorithms did not produce anything that was blurry, but produced an output that was perfect, that was crisp, but that was BS. Another example, if you write down a password on a paper and you want to copy the password, imagine that in your password you have the number 5, then the compression algorithm used in that Xerox machine would replace the 5 with an S, because it would consider that the number 5 is the same as the letter S. So of course, if you use your Xeroxed paper in order to type down your password when you are in front of a machine or whatever, then of course your password will not work because the number 5 would have been replaced by an S. So the problem here is that the compression algorithm does not produce something that is blurry, in which case you could ask yourself, there's a problem, or you could think there's a problem with my Xeroxed paper, but in fact it produces something which is crisp and clear, but which is complete BS. Ted Chiang is a writer, so he starts with this story in order to make you feel that ChatGPT is in fact the same, which means that it is a compression algorithm, and as other compression algorithms, it produces an output that is not reliable. In the case of David Kriesel, you have to understand that it was really astounding to see some architect plans that were copied, but the copy was not a copy at all. It appeared clear and crisp, but in fact was complete BS. So Ted Chiang argues that in a similar way, ChatGPT is itself a lossy compression algorithm. My problem with Ted Chiang is that when I saw that paper, I was quite interested because I wanted to see if in fact the mathematics of ChatGPT could be compared to a lossy compression algorithm. What I read in that paper made me understand that in fact it is not at all the case. What Ted Chiang says is that because ChatGPT produces an output that is believable, you have no idea that the output is in fact BS. For example, say someone would like to know the date of birth of Abraham Lincoln, and he types down the name, and ChatGPT gives him the answer, born in December 1964. If the person does not know anything about history, he would think that in fact Lincoln was born in 1964, because ChatGPT is very confident in his answers. So Ted Chiang then uses that analogy to then say that ChatGPT is in fact just a compression of the internet. And his final argument in his conclusion is that since we have access to the internet, why would we be interested in having access to ChatGPT, which is in fact a lossy compression of the internet? So he says, why would you go to a bad copy of the internet when in fact you have access to the real internet? So that whole argument, that whole paper is really a straw man argument. He first claims that ChatGPT is in itself a lossy compression algorithm. Then he concludes that because it is a lossy compression algorithm, we do not need ChatGPT because we have access to the original, which is we have access to the internet. Okay, so that argument could hold in 2 sentences, right? But then you would not learn anything. Imagine that you go to ChatGPT and you ask yourself, what is ChatGPT? And you read Ted Chiang's article and you have never used ChatGPT before. What would you get out with? You would leave the paper thinking that ChatGPT is in fact similar to an image compression algorithm and that it produces BS. Then you would not use ChatGPT in any way because you would think it's completely useless. Now, that is totally misleading because ChatGPT's or similar systems' goal, like other large language models, is not to give you access to a lossy compression of the internet. It is rather to give you an interactive access to the internet, an interactive access to a meaningful form of the internet. And now, the key difference between the algorithms that are behind compression algorithms used in images and the algorithms used in ChatGPT is that in the case of JPEG, and in particular in the case of the JBIG algorithm, which is the algorithm studied by David Kriesel, who is the guy that Ted Chiang cites in his paper. JBig is an algorithm that tries to match things together. For example, it will tell you that the number 7 is the same as the number 9. And that is all. And the algorithm is very simple. It uses the Hamming distance to say that patterns are the same as other patterns. So for example, in the case of the JBig algorithm, say you have written down 7 and 9, it will first decompose the image into patterns, pattern being 7, the other one being the 9, and then it will say, oh, the number 7 is the same as the number 9. Of course, it has no concept of numbers, but it will say this is the same as this, and that's all. And then it will replace all the 7s by 9s. This is not what LLMs do. LLMs like ChatGPT do not do that. What they do is that they produce an understanding of the internet, an understanding of what humans have written down in a way which we call a statistical distribution. Then, once they have created that statistical distribution, they use it to produce new information. They use it to predict what could be a proper output to a question. This is not at all what compression algorithms like JPEG or JBig do. Say, you use your smartphone or your camera and you make a picture. You would never think of using your camera to make a picture that would be sensitive to the context, which means that if you take a picture of your cat, you expect the picture to look like the cat. And if you made the picture with a different device, with a different smartphone, you would expect the picture to be the same. And that picture would not depend on what you had done a few minutes before. If, for example, you have cooked something, you have made a barbecue, or you have talked with some friends, or you have looked at the moon, you would not expect the image, the picture of your cat to change. Now, that is what happens with an LLM. When you use an LLM, depending on the context in which you're asking that question, the answer will be different. So this is a completely different algorithm that is used in LLMs compared to the algorithms used in compression algorithms for images. A compression algorithm for an image is not interactive. It does not produce an output which depends on you, on your history, on the context. In the case of LLMs, it does. It completely depends on what happened before. The output of an LLM is very much random. It is meaningful, but it has a large component of randomness, which a compression algorithm that is used in images does not have. Now, you have to understand one thing with ChatGPT, is that ChatGPT has a model of what we call meaning. When a compression algorithm works on images, it has no idea of what an image is. ChatGPT has an idea of what is a text, what is a question, what is a human, even though that idea might be overly simplistic, might not please you, might not be appealing or anything, it has a model of the world. This is completely different from what you have in JPEG or JBig algorithms. They do not have a model of the world. And in the case of ChatGPT, when the context changes, the output changes because the model has many parameters which enables the model to react differently in different situations. In the case of the compression algorithm, it will not react differently. You cannot imagine asking your smartphone that, or telling your smartphone that the picture it has taken is wrong. ChatGPT can do that. When I say ChatGPT, I mean LLMs in general. They have the capacity to react to what is your to you, to react to what you think. They will improve, they will change, they will evolve with you. And that is not the case with compression algorithms like JPEG. So my problem with Ted Chiang's article is that it is a very well-written article. Of course, he's a good writer. He is, in fact, a science fiction writer. But the problem is that people who do not know the mathematics behind LLMs will think, oh, an LLM is just like when I take a picture with my camera, and it will be blurry. And the blurriness makes it inappropriate for a general use case. Now, this paper, when you will read, if maybe you have already read it, my paper on Medium, you will see that, in fact, Ted Chiang's article has many, many problems. It argues that ChatGPT is a lossy, blurry algorithm. At the same time, it says that it is not blurry, and this is why it is dangerous. So the article is full of contradictions. For an engineer, as myself, you just can't find your way out of that paper. You just don't understand how it can stand on itself. If you are more literature-minded, it is a well-written article, but it will not teach you anything. It is a long article, which in fact can be itself compressed to 2 sentences. And those 2 sentences, the first one is ChatGPT is a lossy compression algorithm, which is false. And the second sentence is that ChatGPT is dangerous because the output is believable, but in fact is mostly BS. Well, that second sentence, anyone can have experience with it. If any one of you has used ChatGPT or other LLMs, you know that it can hallucinate. In fact, this is a warning that is put at the beginning of every interaction you have with an LLM. It says, be careful with hallucinations. Now, hallucinations, as I argue in my article on Medium, can be corrected. These are defects that can be corrected by using other methods. Corrective methods. You can use an ensemble of LLMs to correct it. You can also use an LLM that connects to the internet in order to correct itself. So in fact, you should never use ChatGPT without thinking. ChatGPT is more like an interactive experience. It is very much like interacting with another human. So when you ask another human, to get back to my example of Lincoln, when you ask another human, when was Lincoln born? And he says 1964, then there is an interaction with the other person. Maybe the guy likes to make jokes. Maybe he didn't hear what you were saying. So you will interact with that person and say, are you sure? Are you sure that he was not born in another century? This is kind of, I cannot understand how he could be born in 1964, given everything he has done in his life. That is meaningless, in fact. So there will be a discussion. It's the same thing with ChatGPT. So that leads me to tell you how I myself wrote that paper. So when I read Ted Chiang's article, I thought it's interesting. I'm going to read it. And then I thought there's problems with it. So what I did is that I first wrote down a quick draft of my ideas, of my criticisms I had with regards to that paper. And I wrote that down inside a text editor, which I then copied into ChatGPT. And I said to ChatGPT what I wanted to do, what I wanted to write down. Now that is interesting because in fact it really looks like the workflow that Stefan Wolfram, the creator of the Mathematica language and computing platform, suggests. Wolfram says that the ideal workflow when using ChatGPT is first to have an ID. You have to be able to develop that ID in written form. So you need expository skills. You write this down to ChatGPT. It can be in a quick form. It doesn't have to be really, well written. You can write some form of draft, and you then construct something with ChatGPT. You discuss with it. And more recently, I didn't have access to that when I wrote down my paper in Medium. Now you have access to the web. In some cases, if you have access to a more recent version of ChatGPT, you can also access the web, which means you can ask ChatGPT to check the information, on which you think there might be a problem. You see, this is the kind of interaction that is interesting. It is the kind of interaction that is interesting with other humans. You construct a story. And what was good for me in that paper is that as I constructed it, then ChatGPT helped me with the grammar, helped me with the spelling I might have had problems with, because when you write down, you make typos and everything. So it was interesting. It was an interactive experience. Now, my advice to people who want to use ChatGPT in the proper way is exactly to go back to what Stefan Wolfram says. So let's summarize that. He says, first, you should have an ID. You should, flesh it out in a raw form inside the ChatGPT prompt, and then construct something. And then you should go back and correct. Go back to what you have written, check with ChatGPT that what you have said is right, and try to build something that can stand on all by itself. This is the good thing. And if you look at my Medium article, you will see that I also added some images, some pictures that were made by another AI, and I used similar prompts in order to produce the images. So the Medium article I produced was really my creation, but helped with ChatGPT as if I had someone who could help me write down the paper. Not someone who would have the IDs, but someone who could help me to flesh them out and to produce something. So this is why I wrote down in another paper on Medium, which you will find on my account there, that in fact, when ChatGPT and LLMs will be a wonderful tool for people who have ideas, but who lack the time to write them down or to fully develop them. It makes it possible for people with ideas to produce more. And also, you know that a good way to do something is to just start doing it. Just think about spending 5 minutes on it. Don't think that you're going to spend 3 hours working on it. Just think about 5 minutes. So write down during 2 or 3 minutes, write down your ideas inside with ChatGPT. I was going to say inside ChatGPT. So write down your ideas, and you will see that suddenly it becomes interesting and funny. You have a conversation with the AI. And of course, today we are in the prehistory of LLMs. They will develop and become much more interesting with the connection to the voice, to your eyes, and other things like that. And you might also think about them being integrated into virtual reality headsets, for example, and then you could have a world in which you could really interact with someone who is interesting and who learns from you, who learns about your specificities, what are the things you like, your weaknesses, how he could help you. So ChatGPT is very much like a private tutor. So this is the way you should use ChatGPT. Now, to finish, what I wanted to say, if you go back to the paper by Ted Chiang, who argues that ChatGPT is in fact just lossy compression, which means that you should not use it, you should rather go to the internet. Of course, this is a completely wrong analogy. ChatGPT is much more like a teacher or a professor in the university. So sometimes the prof says lots of BS. He might not know certain things. He might fake certain things. He might just think that what he's saying is true when in fact it's complete BS. But that's not a problem. It has never been a problem because you can interact with the teacher, you can look at references, and you can discuss with the teacher. So it's the same thing with ChatGPT. And his final argument, which is do not use ChatGPT, rather go to the internet. Well, how could he say that? The internet itself is full of BS. So how do you know what is true and what is not? How do you do it? Of course, if you're completely lost and have no clue, you will just copy down the first thing you read. But being a good internet user, you know that you have to cross-reference. You have to compare your sources and to compare the output in one case to another one. And also you rely on the value of your website. You know that some websites are more reliable than others, which is the same with ChatGPT. You know that when you use certain new capacities of ChatGPT, that these capacities like access to the web make ChatGPT more reliable. So that was the whole point I wanted to make today, is that ChatGPT is not just lossy compression, but I see it as more like a creative expansion. But of course, it depends how you use it. It's like a car. You can use a car to explore the world, to go in interesting places, or you could just say that a car is something that will crash in a tree and kill you. It depends on the way you use the technology. Now, I would advise you all to go to read my Medium paper and to see all the details that I have tried to write down in my paper. Now, thank you, and if you have any question, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you. Yes, so I think that when you use ChatGPT, it can take longer than what you would have written all by yourself. I agree, but then you learn a lot more. You spend a lot of time and you have lots of fun, which is the difference between writing an article all by yourself or writing an article with another person when having a discussion. So it could take longer, but when it takes longer, the additional length of time is not a cost. It's more like a benefit. Now, if you have other questions, you can also join me on Twitter. If you could, follow me on Twitter, I, talk about many subjects on tech, and you can follow me there. That's the easiest, and also subscribe to my Medium page, and you will see my new papers being published, especially because I will be joining a new company soon. So I will have lots of things to talk about. So thank you for your attention. Is there another question maybe from someone else? Yes, I agree. It is able to form sentences, but those sentences are based on a corpus of knowledge, which is, in the case of ChatGPT, the whole of the internet, you can say. So in fact, those sentences are meaningful in a context, which means that it doesn't make sentences just like that, but it makes sentences that have meaning with regards to what you write down, to the context. It is not something that writes down sentences that are just grammatical. It, these are sentences that are useful. They might be wrong, I agree with that, but it's like another human being. Another human being with whom you have a discussion might say some things that are wrong, but you expect them to be relevant. That's the thing with ChatGPT. It's that it is relevant. And the fact that it sometimes says BS is correctable. You can correct that as you can with another human being. And its capacity to connect with the internet. To connect to the internet, if you use more recent versions of ChatGPT, you can connect to the internet, and then it can help you do research. I myself use ChatGPT in that context of research, and it's really helpful, very helpful. So my session will end. Thank you again for your attention. Thank you for being there, and you can connect with me on Twitter or on my Medium page. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.